I'm Shawn. I'm the harm reduction worker for Recovery Connections on Wearside, Sunderland. Um, also in recovery. But it is, just all the staff go above and beyond. Um, like I said, I've worked with them for 9 years. I've done a lot of roles with them, from working in rehab. I've done night shifts, I've been a community coach, rehab coach, I'm doing the harm minimization role now. Um, I think it's something like 95% of our staff are in recovery. So we've been there, we've done it, we've come out the other side. Um, and we had our staff awards a couple of weeks ago. They always do a recovery countdown, not a recovery countdown, so they'll count up everybody's recovery time. It goes up every year. So this year there was I think between all the staff there was 774 years clean time between all the staff, which is amazing. But it is, it's just that, because we've been there, we've done it, we've come out the other side, we'll, we know what it takes for people to get into recovery, Yeah, we don't pressure them, but we'll support them. And we know if people don't get it the first time round, we'll be there for them when they come back round. Every member of staff goes above and beyond, I have just getting my 10.5 year clean time. So it'll be 10.5 years this month. And I was actually talking about this with somebody yesterday who, one of my volunteers who's just getting his 9-month clean time, and I was like, and he was saying, just it's flew over, and I was like, it's the same with me, 10.5 years, I literally don't know where the time's gone, it's literally flew over. But I love being in recovery, my life's so much better. I'm sat in this chair now, 10.5 year clean because of me past, so I don't really regret me past. Yeah, don't want to go back and do it again, um, but I can't change my past, my past today is an asset, so I don't think I would, there's certain things that I would want to change, but, for the most part, I don't think I would change anything, because, I'm here today because of my past. My recovery is my recovery, and it's the same with anybody else's. It's their journey, only they can do it. We can support them along the way, but they've got to do it. Nobody else is going to do it for them. I can advise them, I can give them advice, I can tell them what works for me, but just because something works for me doesn't mean it's going to work for them. And people will get into recovery when they're ready. I tell people my number one drug of choice was heroin, and it was, but I pretty much took every drug on, Northern Man properties. I started off as a young kid sniffing petrol. I always had motorbikes and stuff. Obviously I was, into crime. Growing up in the '90s, stealing cars and stuff like that, motorbikes. So we first, sniffing petrol. But going to the Blue Monkey on a weekend and taking ease. Started off early smoking dope, which I did all the way through my addiction. I tell people, like I said, heroin was my number one drug of choice. But I smoked cannabis every day. All the way through my addiction. But I love the dodgy tablets and all. Diazepam, Tomazis, all that stuff. My family say now, out of all the drugs I took, the tablets were by far the worst, and they were. Some of the situations I got myself into on them. I'd never ever really tried to quit until I did, obviously I'd go to jail and stuff, and get clean in jail, but you get out and you're straight back into that environment, so, I'd have all plans in the world. Every time I went to jail, I used to say, this is the last time, I'm going to sort myself out in here. And I did, sort of, I'd still use sort of in jail. But as soon as you hit them prison gates, you just start remembering dealers' numbers you'd never thought about for a long time. But I'd never ever really seriously thought about quitting until something serious in my life had happened. A good friend of mine had died, and it was, and I was around him when he died, when he OD'd, and that affected us. He was like a really, really good friend of mine. I've been around friends who'd OD'd in the past and stuff, but this lad was pretty much my best friend. We'd been taking heroin, so injecting. We were taking dodgy tablets, but he'd taken some. There was Xanax he took. I didn't take them, but we fell asleep on the bed together, and he'd OD'd during the night. I found him the next day. Typical addict, I found an ambulance and he OD'd and passed away during the night. I found him the next day, phoned in an ambulance, and I left him. It affected us, but not long after that, I'd been arrested for something. I can't remember what it was for, and it did affect us, but I don't think that, because I'd been around friends who'd OD'd, I've had quite a few friends die from ODs, and family members, so that one incident wouldn't probably have stopped us from using, the biggest thing for me was, like I said, the drugs just weren't working anymore. They weren't doing anything for us. They were just making us feel normal. Well, probably not even normal, but they literally weren't doing nothing for us. And not long after that, I'd been arrested for something. I was in the cells at Peterlee, where I'm from, and I'd probably been arrested for shoplifting. I can't remember what it was for now. And this lad had come down into the cell, and he was, I've spoke about this many times. I'm still friends with this guy, a lad called Gary, who was working for the place. And he opened the cell door. He was dressed just like I was, and he come in, and he started talking about him being, he used to be an addict. He was 5 years clean. He used to live in the shed. He used to be a heroin addict. And I didn't believe a word he said at the time. I just thought he was trying to trap us into something. He's working for the police. But then he was like, I can get you into rehab. He was like, you're getting kept in tonight. You're getting charged. You're getting kept in tonight. You're going back to jail tomorrow. Or I can get you into rehab. And I thought, that sounds pretty good. Just me crazy addict thinking. And even so, the drugs weren't doing anything for us anymore. And I was literally 7 stone, and literally dying on my feet. I thought I was still enjoying the drugs. Like I said, I didn't know anything else. Since I was 13, all I've done is steal, use drugs, and go to jail. I didn't know anything else. And that's what all my friends did and all. So it was just, I just thought it was normal. But then, he gave us a choice. He was like, I can get you into rehab. You can go to jail, or I can get you into rehab. And I was like, yeah, that sounds pretty good to me. My crazy addict thinking was, because the drugs weren't working anymore, I could go into jail. I'm not going to go to jail. I can go to rehab. I can get all the drugs out of my system, my methadone, get the gear out of my system, go into rehab for 3 or 4 weeks and stop, get all the drugs out of my system, and start feeling normal again. And that's what I did. I went into rehab. I only had to wait a couple of days. I think it was about a week I waited to get into rehab, and he got us straight in within a week. And I stuck to my plan. That was my plan. Get all the drugs out of my system and then walk out. It was supposed to be a 6-month program. I was supposed to be there for 6 months. But I stuck it out for 3 or 4 weeks, and I came down off my methadone. I got all the drugs. I started, I did my withdrawal. I started to feel normal again. And then I told the staff I was going to the shop for a pouch of tobacco, and I just didn't come back. I'd walked out. And the rehab I was in was literally just 10 minutes up the road from where I lived. So within half an hour of leaving rehab, I had a needle in my arm and I was popping dodgy tablets. And within 3 days, I'd OD'd. I was on a life support machine. My relapse at the time was the best thing that ever happened to us. You know, I've had some amazing stuff happen to us in recovery. You know, I've got my first job. I've got an amazing girlfriend. Um, you know, been on holiday, passed my driving license, you know, my driving test and stuff. Um, but I tell people my relapse was the best thing that ever happened to us, because it showed us I could not keep doing what I was doing. And the biggest thing for me was, just the rehab I was in, the staff, I was supposed to be the rehab's first death, the staff were told I wasn't coming off this life support machine. My family were told I wasn't coming off it. And I was on it for 2 weeks, and I came off it, I come round after 2 weeks. And the first thing the hit is just, round my bed, because I've always had a good family round us, but all my family were around my bed, my mum, my dad, my sisters, all crying their eyes out. And the guilt just hit us, and I was just like, I can't keep doing this. Through them 20 years of heroin use and being on methadone and going into the recovery services and stuff, I'd never ever heard of recovery. I didn't know anyone, and they didn't, nobody ever really mentioned it. Up until I'd say the last couple of years of my addiction. For me, I had an absolutely amazing worker who worked for, it was Lifeline at the time, but she was a lady called Stacey. She was absolutely amazing, and she tried to get us into groups and stuff like that, but she was absolutely amazing, But for me and all, the police tried, because I was classed as a PPO, prolific offender, and the police used to turn up. So the PPO officers would turn up at my door when I was living in Easington and try to take us to football, try to take us to NA meetings and stuff like that. And at the time, I absolutely hated it, because I used to think the whole street thought I was a grass. But the police did try to get us into recovery, they tried to, like I said, they used to try to take us to football, take us to NA meetings and stuff like that. So, they did try, my probation officer did try and all. Through most of my addiction, I used the services to just get methadone, I wasn't interested in going to groups and stuff. But, through a lot of my addiction and being on methadone, as I said, I didn't, not many people mentioned recovery to us, in groups and stuff like that. I'd literally just go in, give a drug test, get me methadone script, and I'd be on my way. It was only the last couple of years of me addiction where, me worker I was on about, Stacey, who was, like I said, she was absolutely amazing, would try to get us to go to meetings and come into groups and stuff, and she did try to go above and beyond. They didn't really listen to her at the time, but I've got a lot to be thankful to her for, which she went above and beyond, and got us back into rehab within 2 weeks, so I wasn't back out on the street. Getting into that first group's the hardest one, and what I find with most people, once they get over that fear of getting into that group for the first time, they want to come back, and I get that fear, because I've been there. For me, I pick people up, I'll bring them to the groups, I'll sit in the group with them, I'll drop them off back at home, and it just makes it easier, familiar face in that group, I had a massive fear around recovery, especially for me, just as I said, all I'd done since I was 13 was steal, go to jail, use drugs. It's all I knew. I've got a criminal record, probably as tall as you. I'd never ever had a proper job, and I'm like, then I'm gonna get into recovery. I'm gonna give up drinking drugs. And I literally thought my life was gonna be a pile of crap. I literally thought, because I didn't know anyone in recovery neither. I didn't know anyone who'd get in recovery. I'd never really heard of recovery. And all my friends were drinking and using drugs, so I thought I was literally gonna do rehab, get clean and sober, and then move back into my own place, and all my old friends would still be around us and they'd be drinking and using. and I'd be on a straight head, and I literally thought life was going to be crap. You know, I literally thought my life was over and done with. Um, but you know, so I had that massive fear of getting in recovery. You know, just it's like you're having to find yourself all over again. You know, you've been this person for however long. For me, you know, being in addiction for 27 years, and then I have to find myself again. You know, and all I've done is, like I said, you know, use drugs, go to jail, and steal. You know, for 27 years of my life. You know, and then at 39, when I got clean and sober, you know, what do I do with myself now? So it was literally like having to find myself again. You know. And that's, you know, and that's the hardest part, you know, to, you know, coming off the drink and the drugs. That's, you know, don't get us wrong, it was hard enough, you know, but that's the easy part. You know, the hard part is staying off them. Well, I've got all that trust back. You know, you know, my mum would see us walking along the street, you know, and she would lock the door. You know, she wouldn't let us in the house. You know, and I don't blame her. You know, just, you know, I was either going to blag her for money or steal something out the house. You know what I mean? And I, you know, and I talk about it regularly. You know, one of the biggest things for me in recovery is having that trust back in my life. And one of the biggest things for me is having a key to my mum's house. You know, I can let myself in anytime I want. You know, she doesn't have to worry about me anymore. You know, the amount of times you know, my mum said, you know, my sisters, when I've had my own places and stuff, when I was in the madness, they would come over every couple of weeks and check on us, but they always said they never knew, you know, when they were coming over to the house to check on us, whether they were going to find us dead in the house, you know. So yeah, I've got all that trust back in my life. You know, they don't have to worry about us anymore.